Cool. Thank you for that awesome intro, Josh. And thank you, as always, to Kira and Josh for having me. It's always an honor to talk, speak with other liberty-loving individuals. Um, I think our final pitch tonight from Brandon was a perfect lead-in because I too am optimistic about the future. It's not easy to be optimistic sometimes with respect to human liberty because there's quite a lot of challenges. Sometimes it feels like we're falling into a bit of a dystopian world. Just name it. It's whatever trend you want to look at. It can get scary. However, there's stuff happening in the space I work in that I think is going to make a pivotal impact in terms of creating a freer world. And that's what I want to talk about today, specifically around the topic of DAOs. Just quick show of hands. Who has heard of DAOs? Okay. And who actually is kind of familiar with how they work and okay, cool. So we're dealing. Okay, who knows about crypto? Cool. So we're dealing here with DAOs with a sort of emerging technology or an emerging sort of dynamic, a new way of structuring things that is. Just to see those hands not really go up for DAOs makes me really glad I'm doing this talk because. Like any sort of emerging tech, there's a lot of confusion about what this stuff is. The same thing happened when Bitcoin became a thing. Like, what the fuck is Bitcoin? How does this work? Like, why is this interesting? And then once crypto evolved, we had Ethereum, smart contracts. But again, I guess at the most fundamental level, DAOs are built on this same technology that really that started with Bitcoin on that type of technology, and we'll explore that. So that's kind of the general theme. We're going to talk about DAOs, but we're also going to relate it back to human freedom because at the end of the day, that's what it's all about. I think this is my fourth talk here. I've talked twice about how blockchain technology can actually promote the cause of global liberty. I think the last one I did was about 2 years ago exactly. I also talked about the dangers of crypto tribalism and how those things are absurd as another talk. Anyway, let's start this one. I feel like I need to bring my energy level up a bit too. I woke up at 5 today, and I'll be honest, I woke up at 5 and I didn't get back to sleep because I was excited for this talk. So I gotta. What's that? In the morning, yeah. Should have been in the evening. Yeah, right. Okay, so let's look at the big idea here. DAOs are a new way that humans can organize themselves. This is a decentralized autonomous organizations, and just whenever you deal with an acronym like this, it always feels a little bit buzzwordy, and certainly DAOs can get buzzwordy. So we're gonna clear away the hype and kind of the sort of the mystery that sometimes comes with buzzwordy shit like that. But essentially, they're a new way for humans to organize. They're built on the permissionless, censorship-resistant, transparent foundations of decentralized blockchains. By leveraging these decentralized attributes, DAOs can accomplish things that were heretofore difficult or even impossible. So that's sort of a bunch of loaded statements, but we can dig in and get more clarity. So specifically, we're going to look at, okay, what exactly is a DAO and what is it not? Why would anybody want to join or create a DAO? We'll look at some real-life use cases and examples of DAOs in action. Also explore some of the challenges, some of the trade-offs inherent with DAOs, but also some of the challenges. As with any newer technology, emerging technology, there's some challenges for sure, and it's important to be aware of those. And then all within the context, and I think we'll kind of conclude this way about how I'm making a big claim here. How can this crazy buzzwordy acronym thing that nobody really heard of, most people haven't heard of until recently, if at all, how is this going to be a tool for global liberty? So let's dig in. So again, decentralized autonomous organization is what a DAO is, or what the term means. So let's unpack that. Decentralized. This is built on blockchain technology that inherits or that has certain attributes. This is a very important element of DAOs, and we'll cover that in the next slide. Autonomous. So the term DAO kind of came out in 2013-ish, or I think it was probably coined around then, maybe 2012. And in hindsight, maybe it could have been a better term, but like this term autonomous has always been around, and it does, to say DAO kind of rolls off the tongue, but autonomous, it kind of, it makes you think about maybe like a robot or an AI doing things and automating things. It's a little bit of like a misnomer to say that in the context of DAOs, what autonomous really refers to is powered by transparent smart contracts, and these define the governance of a DAO, which is another very crucial piece we'll get to shortly. And sometimes it's functionality. And also DAO can power DAO treasuries in a transparent fashion. But again, these aren't like autonomous things. And then organization. So this is, okay, everybody knows kind of at high level, well, what's the definition of organization? In the context of a DAO, it's really groups of people gathering, collaborating, and building around anything they choose. Anything they choose. That could be building a business, a charity, politics, different causes, supporting different causes, art, music, creativity, really anything. They're governed through on-chain voting. This kind of comes back to that governance piece, which we'll touch on shortly, with typically no central, all-powerful C-suite or leaders. The community tends to own DAOs, and this is a very important distinction, as we'll see soon. Just a brief aside before we dig in a little bit further about why should you listen to me about DAOs. I guess first off, when it comes to crypto, always be skeptical about what anybody's saying, because anybody who professes to know it all in this industry is full of shit, because it changes so fast. That said, I've been in crypto since about 2012. I've been working in the space since 2017, and I currently am employed by a DAO. Right? I'm a contributor at a DAO. My title at a DAO called ShapeShift is Tokenomics Workstream Leader. So what that really is, it's like, it kind of has elements of like a CFO type position, but in a DAO, it's very different. There's things like treasury management that entails, community sort of leadership, strategizing. It's a lot of interesting stuff. But just to provide some context about who the hell is this guy telling us about DAOs, this is kind of, I'm relating that from my perspective. And again, we'll explore some of this stuff more. Okay, so this is one of the most important things to understand about DAOs as we dig in, and it's the very first letter in the acronym, decentralized, because without the decentralization, none of this really works. And also none of what I'm claiming to be true with respect to global liberty, it makes sense either. The decentralization is crucial. So what do we mean by that? In the context of DAOs, it's permissionless. Basically, anyone anywhere can build a DAO, and any token holder can participate in its governance. So there's no gatekeepers. Nobody can say, oh, you can't do that. It's because it's built on decentralized blockchains. Transparent. This is a huge. There's a whole slide on this because it's so important. But basically, the entirety of a DAO's finances and governance can be on chain for all to see. This transparency is, I think, a welcome sort of difference to the bullshit we have to deal with on a daily basis in terms of whether it's government spending or whether it's you see all this all the time with maybe fraud and stuff like that. We'll dig into that because it's very important. And then censorship resistance. And this is also super crucial. No individual or institution can interfere with the DAO's on-chain operations. That's not to say that people can't throw a hand grenade into a DAO community and really fuck with it. But with respect to its on-chain operations, especially if it's built on a secure blockchain, really nobody can mess with that. It's all transparent and it's open for everybody to interact with and kind of see the proceedings. So this has some very important implications for these organizations that are forming around the world. Okay, so here's one big difference. And again, like I used a very broad definition of what DAOs are. So there's DAOs for all sorts of things. There's DAOs for like decentralized finance or DeFi projects. ShapeShift is actually in the DeFi space. That's what we're doing. But there's all sorts of other DAOs. There was actually a DAO called Constitution DAO last year that raised in a decentralized fashion, raised a bunch of money. I believe $40 million, and their sole aim was to try to purchase a copy of one of the original copies of the Constitution in an auction, and then decide, as a community, what do we do with this beautiful Constitution? It might be the only one that the government hasn't shat all over, but or shredded to bits with the war on drugs. Their efforts were not successful. Somebody outbid them, but the proof of concept was very powerful. They raised $40 million to try to do this, and really, there's no limit in terms of what you can do in terms of like organizing around different things. That said, there's some important differences in terms of how these are structured versus all the organizations that we're used to already. So what are some of those differences? For one thing, DAOs tend to have less top-down hierarchy. They're much flatter. I kind of alluded to the notion of less centralized leadership. DAOs can still have leadership teams for sure. Like my title at ShapeShift DAO is Tokenomics Workstream Leader. But that said, it's much flatter, and there usually isn't like a single guy or group of people, or there's not like a CEO type role dictating everything. It's really up to the community what happens. DAOs don't have centralized leadership that has carte blanche influence over the organization's decision making. Kind of speaking to what I just said, important decisions are made by a DAO's token holders and community, rather than a cloistered C-suite in the proverbial smoke-filled room. And we'll talk about that as well. Another big difference is this is just very much in keeping with kind of the general trends we've seen, especially ever since COVID, where people tend to work remote. DAOs are almost never like headquartered physically in meet space in some office, and they tend to be online. Most things happen maybe on Discord, maybe Slack in some cases, and they tend to be more global in nature, and there's a good reason for that, as we'll see shortly. I'm gonna have some water real quick. Talk amongst yourselves. So, I mentioned governance. So this is a kind of a paradigm shift in terms of how organizations can be governed. So everybody's kind of familiar with the paradigm of, think about any publicly traded corporation, the engines of our capitalist society. As a shareholder, typically you have a measure of governance rights over the organization. You have people voting. But the whole thing is quite, I'd say it's not very participatory. Not a lot of people have access to this sort of thing because you really kind of just have to be one of the insiders to really have much influence, unless maybe you have enough money to execute like a hostile takeover. But the idea of shareholders' rights is something that everybody's familiar with. But like the idea of community building up around like a company is kind of like, it doesn't really make a lot of sense. DAOs tend to be a little bit more organic and community driven, and governance is a big reason why. The reason is the community, as defined by people who own the DAO's tokens, get to say what happens. They get to vote on things. And what do I mean when I say a DAO's tokens? These are things where sometimes or frequently these tokens will have value, and people who hold them, maybe they purchase them, maybe they earn them by participating in the DAO. That's frequently the case. They then have the ability to vote on what happens in the DAO. So let's use an example from ShapeShift, which again is a decentralized finance kind of platform, crypto platform. Any big decision at the project I work for, no single person or even group of a couple people have the ability to unilaterally say what happens. Everything goes up as proposals, or at least like impactful issues that people then can vote on. So this is a screenshot from today. There's some proposals. These are like workstream renewal proposals. So I mentioned I had the tokenomics workstream. The only reason I have a job is because I had to create a proposal myself and say, hey, ShapeShift community, I think the DAO needs this function. Here's what I propose. And this is what I think we should do, blah, blah, blah. If the community of token holders didn't agree with that, they would not have voted for that. on a similar fashion, I recently had to put up my own workstream renewal proposal for Q1 and Q2. And again, if the community thought I sucked at what I was doing, they would vote me out. So there's a lot of accountability there. Fortunately, they didn't think I sucked, so I'm back for another term, which is great because I love what I'm doing. But this governance piece is super important because it's more participatory. The community has more of a vested interest in what happens. And by the way, I hope everybody's following me so far. There will be Q&A. Sometimes I like to throw it in the middle, but to make sure we don't get sort of like go in a different direction, we'll just wait till the end. But as you have questions, just please save those, and we'll certainly dig into those. So let's talk about some of the benefits of DAOs, and we'll kind of return to some of those other like really important clarifying points. But like, why would anybody want to do this? Like, what everything I said about decentralization, that sounds cool and everything, but what does this actually translate into practice? And I picked out this image of a SpaceX rocket launching because I think DAOs are kind of part of the future of how humans will organize them in the future, or organize ourselves in the future. In 20 years, you might be able to be like, man, I remember when DAOs were brand new, and now they're everywhere. But launching a project is much easier compared to say a typical sort of thing. Let's just use an example of there was actually a project called FreeROS DAO that launched in 2021. You can probably imagine what the purpose of it is, but it raised I think like at least $12 million for efforts to support Ross, who obviously is in a horrible situation right now because of our unjust war on drugs. This was able to happen because somebody had an idea, said, hey, let's create a DAO, let's raise money for this, and then anybody that wants to support this can do so. I think anybody that does it can also get like an NFT, which is a whole different can of worms, but they can get art maybe that Ross did, and like, there's some elements to that. Additionally, by creating a community like that, you bring together like-minded people. If you're a skeptic, you might say, well, couldn't you do that without crypto? Couldn't you do that without a DAO? Couldn't you do like a GoFundMe? Well, for starters, a GoFundMe is no longer a sure thing with many causes. Of course, as we've seen with like, Wikipedia, and we've seen many instances of the financial powers that be cutting off causes that don't necessarily jive with what the mainstream wants, what the establishment wants. I don't know if that would have been the case with FreeROS, but that's just one example of how it's important to have censorship-resistant forms of donating in this case. So the other thing that's very important is I mentioned the transparent nature of DAO's finances on the blockchain. So with FreeROS, it's like people can see, well, clearly we're putting money into this smart contract. They know exactly how much is accruing, and they can be sure that money is there. Sometimes these things can certainly get hacked, or they could be malicious actors. So it's not like solving the problem of humans can be evil. That's still a factor for sure. But launching things is much easier, similar to like a business. Typically, you might need a VC or something, seed money to get going. Now you can just kind of have a good idea. Maybe you have an initial sort of governance token. You could potentially sell the token, but here in the U.S., it's very hard because we have awful regulators who are married to ideas about what securities are from the 1930s. Again, a whole other can of worms. But the lack of friction and the speed at which you can launch these things is far faster. It's a magnitude of order of magnitude improvement over kind of the way things have worked before. End of gatekeeping. And I use this image for I very specifically went to find an image of the wall falling because like I remember being about 10 when the wall came down, and it was one of the formative moments in my life, like seeing these people who were behind the Iron Curtain liberated. Obviously, the story of authoritarianism did not end there, and there's been a sort of a a comeback, so to speak, on a global basis. But when I say the end of gatekeeping, what I'm referring to is there's really nothing that can prevent anybody from accessing a DAO. So and also starting one. And again, this is because, and we'll use Ethereum as an example. Ethereum is the most secure and decentralized smart contract platform, and it's what ShapeShift is built on. It's what most DAOs are currently built on, because let me put this a different way. Let's say somebody had an issue with Free Ross DAO. Like let's say the government said this is not going to fly. There is really nothing the government could do without maybe just an insane spend of resources and time and energy to actually shut the DAO down. It exists on a unstoppable layer. I mean, I know it's just like a very mundane Wednesday night, but think about what this fucking means. Like, this is very powerful stuff. We worry a lot about what the government can do, about what institutions can do, what our government can do, what the Chinese government can do. These are tools for human freedom that we can wield. We just have to get our heads around what this means. So if you're starting to feel like dire and like starting to feel depressed about things, just know that these things already exist. You can build stuff that is truly unstoppable. A similar note with respect to gatekeeping is think about VCs. VCs certainly play an important role in our capitalist world, and they take on risk that, and if they didn't, early stage companies couldn't really take off. However, because the tokenization that I was talking about earlier, VCs don't necessarily need to play a role. In other words, you can have a really good idea about XYZ, maybe a business idea, and you don't have to, go placate the people on Sand Hill Road out in Silicon Valley and be like, please fund my company. If you have a compelling idea, it's much easier to get started because of that sort of tokenization aspect. Although, to be sure, there are some challenges because of the SEC and that sort of stuff. This is another really big one. So a really cool sort of backstory about ShapeShift, as Kira can attest as well. She used to be at ShapeShift. ShapeShift was not always a DAO. We actually used to be a centralized company. Our bread and butter back in the day was as a crypto exchange. So if you had your Litecoin, you wanted to swap it for Bitcoin, you could do that, and it worked out great for a while. Eventually, though, everything changed. The regulatory landscape changed. We had to change what we were doing. The Wall Street Journal, the Wall Street Journal had an article being very critical of ShapeShift and its CEO. They said, what was the quote? They said, we were like in some 1800s or 1980s office building downtown next to like weed stores or something. As if that's bad. Like, damn straight we're next to weed stores. Yeah, but even that at that moment, it's like it was very tangible. Like you can see the establishment does not like this. Like this is like technology that's threatening the establishment, which was wonderful to see. Anyway, so long story short, the business model of ShapeShift, centralized ShapeShift, turned out to not really be viable after a while. What was working stopped working, and we're kind of pivoting. Eventually, the decision was made to decentralize ShapeShift. So what does that mean? ShapeShift wound down its centralized operations. Every employee, save maybe 2 or 3, was actually lost their job. I lost my job. The CEO lost his job even. Everybody lost their jobs because the entity itself ceased to exist. Technically, it's still in the stages of winding down. But in its place is a decentralized entity which ShapeShift is not incorporated anywhere. There is no legal structure behind ShapeShift. And one of the important things in terms of this borderless aspect is I remember very distinctly, like at Centralized ShapeShift, there was a very talented developer that lived in France that the company wanted to hire. Good developers in the crypto space are hard to find. They're kind of like unicorns, and this guy was good. So the thought was like, well, this is exciting, and it's not out of the certainly in the realm of possibility we could hire somebody that is in a different country, but French hiring laws, French labor laws are so onerous that it's basically a non-starter. You sound like you're from Europe. You're smiling. Yeah. It's basically, my understanding, maybe this is hyperbole, but it's almost impossible to fire somebody in France once you hire them. You know, so you can imagine like that's a commitment. God damn. I mean, you better really like this person. So ShapeShift did not move forward with making that hire. Let's compare and contrast that to what we do now as a DAO. It's truly borderless. We're not an entity. You know, we're not a sort of a organization, a business. We don't have to comply with labor laws. Really, there is no us to comply. It's a group of people. It's a community. So, in terms of France's labor laws, there's nothing to stop us from hiring somebody out there because we're just a DAO. You know, there's to put it differently, if France had a problem with what we were doing, where would they send the letter? There's nobody that they can go to. We exist as a DAO. We're decentralized, and that's where it gets really powerful to talk about decentralization. Like, there is no single point of failure. Of course, there's humans. There's like many humans contributing to the DAO, but if France had an issue, said, "Oh, I won't imitate a French accent." Sacre bleu. But you can imagine. Yeah. You can imagine what might happen. But there's nothing that they could do to prevent that. And meanwhile, the French citizen is perfectly capable or able to contribute. And we actually do have a French developer, and he's wonderful. He's great. So that's a good example of borderless participation. You know, I know I'm preaching to the proverbial choir here, but like, borders are just these ridiculous abstractions invented by, you know, institutions, invented by governments for their own gain. There's certainly a historical reason they're there, but like when you think about it, you know, you see the planet from a distance, man, it's ridiculous. Like, these are just arbitrary lines in the sand. They mean nothing in terms of humans who want to think bigger and beyond that. And a DAO is a perfect example of making that happen. Anywhere across the world, as long as they can access the internet, essentially, and maybe they're free to do so in their own country. It might be harder for, say, you know, people in some countries, but really anybody can join our DAO or any DAO and participate, and that's a big difference over how things have been. So, who knows this fucking asshole? So this guy, this really pisses me off because in the crypto industry, we have to work hard to fight the perception of sort of omnipresent scams. You know, there's a lot of people that don't really know about what we're building in the space, and there's this idea of, well, it's just a bunch of rug pulls and scams, and crypto is just a bunch of fraud. So there was this case recently of an exchange called FTX, an exchange that custodied, that held other people's crypto assets, kind of like a stockbroker, but they were, you know, holding crypto assets. Anyway, one of the biggest exchanges in the world. You may have seen like Tom Brady showing them in a Super Bowl commercial, you know, last year. Like, huge, just massive, multi-billion-dollar organization. It turns out the entire thing was a fraud, pretty much, or at least in recent history, it was. They were basically pulling some sort of variation of like a Madoff type thing, or like, you know, it was just a classic fraud. However, this is an incredibly important distinction here, and one that I think regulators and politicians, I hope, will understand soon, is this did not happen because of crypto. This happened because this guy turned out to be another Madoff. Crypto, and the technology that DAOs are building on is the solution to this. So let me explain that a little bit more. In the autonomous portion of the intro, explain what autonomous meant, I mentioned that all of the DAO's proceedings in terms of its finances happen what we call on-chain. That means it happens on a blockchain. That means anybody can see what's happening. Can you imagine if you could just at any given moment see, like, well, what's the state of Apple's finances? Well, Apple, you know, they have their quarterly reports for sure, and you kind of get a sense for what they're doing. Organizations that are not publicly traded, you don't even have that insight. With a DAO, or really anything built on a blockchain, you can see at any given moment the state of those finances. So this was a centralized project or a centralized platform. Even though they were in custody of crypto assets, there was nothing decentralized about FTX. They were not built on blockchain technology. They were just taking people's assets. They were completely centralized, their own databases, their own servers. A big contrast to what we call DEXs, or decentralized exchanges in the space. So DAOs utilize decentralized technology in the sense that, to use another example with ShapeShift, and this is near and dear to my heart because I work on with things like treasury management. At any given moment, you could just go to the ShapeShift DAO treasury and you can see down to a penny what is the state of ShapeShift's finances right now. It's completely transparent. Even if people of the DAO wanted to somehow obfuscate that, we couldn't do it. If the DAO wanted to like shift around money and be really shady about it, and an astute and attentive observer could spot that. It's all transparent. So this is the transparency, I feel like, is one of the most important paradigm shifts. When you think about how many things are wrong in our society today, whether it's whether it is like fraud, or whether certainly at the governmental level, like how many $1 million toilets is the government going to buy to supposedly fund something? Like what the hell are they spending that on? It's like the world needs more transparency. More transparency helps people make better decisions. More transparency can prevent people from losing money on scams and just poor investments, and also make smarter decisions in terms of accurately assessing where the money is. So typically DAOs will have a treasury of people. You might be wondering, where does that treasury come from? Let's say there is an art DAO and people want to send in maybe their crypto into this DAO to fund it, and maybe it has an objective. It's going to promote certain artists, whatever. It's just all arbitrary. You can do anything, but the money could come from contributors sending into that treasury, and then anybody could see at any given moment, well, what's the status of this treasury? Let's check it out. The charity world is full of fraud and full of malfeasance, and I see a lot of people nodding, yeah, and it sucks. That's one of the worst things ever, because they're messing with people's people want to be altruistic, and people are and charities that do that just take advantage of that altruism, and it sucks. This is a huge difference, that inherent transparency, and there are charitable DAOs emerging as well, as we'll see shortly. So, and again, if you guys are unclear on any points I'm presenting here, just save them for Q&A. I know this is kind of it might seem a little bit like, what's he talking about? But I'm happy to address and clarify anything. But I want to look at a couple of use cases. Am I good on time, Josh? I have 5 minutes left? Okay, cool. All right. Okay, cool. All right. So yeah, let's look at some use cases. I mentioned ShapeShift. So here's a really cool thing. Just building new stuff. And in this case, from let's say a technical kind of software crypto perspective, one of the problems in the crypto space that the crypto world has had is, even though this is decentralized, a lot of node infrastructure that drives this technology often is centralized. In other words, you might be running these nodes on Amazon, and that's kind of a centralized point of failure. So long story short, ShapeShift incubated a project that is now going to be its own DAO called Archeo, and the goal there is to build a decentralized node infrastructure to address one of these problems in crypto. Of course, we're building other stuff and making it easier to interface with projects, and it's super cool. And there's many examples of this in the decentralized finance space. Projects with billions of dollars, DAOs with billions of dollars in value in their treasury. This is happening now. This is a thing. You just don't hear about it much yet because it's such a new paradigm, and also because the media, tends to either I don't know if there's an intentional effort to put the wool over your eyes, but it's also what really sells when it comes to the media. It's oh, something blew up, or you never hear about what's going well. Definitely, this is an emerging thing. It's happening right now, and most people aren't aware of it. But if you are inclined to dig in. There's just check it out. The space is great. I mentioned Free Ross. So, I mean, I can't think of a more noble cause. And again, yeah, could you have done a GoFundMe? Sure, but like then you run into the problem not only of like maybe that gets censored or shut down, but like maybe there's a single person running this. With a DAO, you can have a much more decentralized set of people in control of like a treasury. This launched in 2021. I think they're still active. I don't know what actually happened to these funds, but it is a legit active project. And man, Satoshi willing, someday this guy will be free. And yeah, maybe he can speak here. That would be awesome. I mentioned the charity space. So Gitcoin is a project actually was birthed here in Colorado, up in Boulder. If anybody knows Kevin Waukee, he's a complete badass. So this is a charitable giving project in the crypto space. So it's basically funding for open source software and leveraging that transparency and that ease of sending in funds into a DAO in order to really basically you can sort of leverage your giving that way. So you could send in $1,000 to a project, and because there's some other backers, maybe that project, thanks to your $1,000, maybe there's like a matching donation, or maybe even more than that. So millions of dollars in funding have happened on Gitcoin, 73 million. I mean, this is powerful stuff, and this was not a thing previously. Photoshop. All right, Photoshop. All right. Okay, another awesome use case, creating. So Pleaser DAO is a art sort of themed DAO. I don't want to invoke another acronym, NFTs, because it is another non-fungible token. You guys may have heard about them. It's basically like imagine being able to sort of create scarcity for any digital asset. That's what NFTs are, and it's been very popular in the art space. So Pleaser DAO is a way to like sort of that a community can kind of get together and leverage its collective resources, its energy and time and finances to promote certain types of art. So this has happened, and they also spawn other things. I believe, if I read correctly today, I think Pleaser DAO actually spawned the Free Ross DAO. So that's another really cool thing about crypto is thanks to that ease of launching stuff. Different DAOs can spawn off, different projects can spawn off very organically and quickly. It's really, it just speaks to the nature of like human ingenuity. And again, without bureaucracy, without red tape getting in the way. If there's one thing you want to take away from this talk, DAOs are the antithesis. They're the solution to red tape. Of course, it's not like a utopia. There's always going to be issues to deal with, but it's like there's a certain freedom that comes when you don't have to deal with dealing with all those barriers. Funding, I mentioned Constitution DAO. So a bunch of people sent their money in, tried to buy the Constitution, didn't work out, but it was like a great precedent, a great proof of concept, I think. Again, humans voluntarily collaborating around different stuff that they all think is cool and jumping in. So here's a point that might be a little bit provoking for you guys, but like I think another thing we'll see is we'll see projects emerge that aim to do things that are more typically considered the realm of the left, things that related to climate change, or maybe even like attempts at, say, UBI. So if you think about this, everybody might have their own opinions about things like that, causes commonly championed by the left. But when you think about it, the only thing that tends to make them so undesirable is the fact that it always entails the government taking your money without your permission to do stuff. When you think about DAO, it's like, wait, everything I just said it's like permissionless, nobody's forcing you to do anything. So I think we might see like, different causes start to get traction, and it's like, you're seeing experiments already with like, or talk about like DAOs doing like UBI type stuff, and I think that's wonderful. Like, as long as nobody's committing force or fraud to tell you what to do, my God, let's do all sorts of experiments. So I think these types of like social goods things could be a wonderful antidote to just the out of control government spending that we've seen. People have come to rely on the government too heavily, and instead, there's a mechanism by which people can voluntarily collaborate, voluntarily give their resources, and work on things and make a difference, a lasting difference in the world. and again in a transparent fashion. Okay, so I just painted a pretty cool picture, but I don't want to make it sound like it's all bunnies and rainbows, because there's certainly some challenges. So again, crypto is a new industry, and DAOs are a very new sort of phenomenon. Really in a meaningful way, they didn't really exist, until say 3 years ago, except for a few kind of other weird cases, but okay, one of the challenges, we're making this shit up as we go along. Like there is no playbook for how to do this. So we're building on new technology. We're trying to find new ways to do things. At ShapeShift, that's very much the case. It's like we're just feeling our way along. We can't refer to like best practices. It's not like Harvard Business School says, well, here's what a bunch of people think you should do, and like, well, how do we do this? It's like we're making this up, which is cool, but it's also it can be stressful at times, and it also speaks to the fact that it is kind of a grand experiment. There is no guarantee of success. There's also centralization risks. For all the talk of centralization or decentralization, there can always be risks of, like, for example, maybe a strong leader emerges that does maybe wind up effectively being the CEO, even though maybe they're not called the CEO. This could happen. Also with token distribution, we have actually seen this with some projects where maybe just a few people wind up becoming the de facto governance controllers of governance because they have too many of the tokens. So these are things we have to be aware of. Bitcoin maximalists would argue that the Ethereum itself, which again most of these are built on, is actually centralized. I would argue vociferously that is not the case, and it's quite decentralized. But you always, when you're talking about blockchain technology, you always have to consider how decentralized is that blockchain you're building on. Regulatory uncertainty and legal ambiguity. DAOs are. There's many ways to structure a DAO. Some DAOs are using a new way to structure the projects based out of Wyoming. Colorado is, I think, developing this. You could kind of have no structure, but the legal ambiguity is tricky. Additionally, regulatory uncertainty, especially around that token element. The SEC, God forbid, you should have the ability to risk your own capital. You have to have over $1 million in net worth to do that. Excluding your house, because we can't have people making their own decisions. The nanny state's got to protect us. So this is a big battle that's been going on in DC and will continue. I'm optimistic over the long run, though, but it's certainly a challenge. Here's another thing, though. Like the last 2 points, just because something is a DAO doesn't magically make everything better. Do we have a product market fit? Do we have a sufficient treasury to last through difficult economic times in a bear market? Those final 2 points are things that we've been talking about heavily at ShapeShift, and same with many other projects. So these are challenges, but despite those challenges, I think that the concept of a DAO will continue to grow and proliferate, and humans will continue to gravitate towards these novel coordination mechanisms. Okay, so summing it up, and thank you for sticking with me through this. DAOs are platforms for voluntary association. Anybody who loves liberty I think, will find a lot to love in DAOs. These are built on voluntary association. Like nobody can force you to join a DAO, and nobody can prevent you from joining a DAO. Anybody can build or create one around really anything you want, and that permissionless aspect is so powerful. Institutions can't prevent anybody from participating. Maybe what if you wanted to build fuck JP Morgan DAO? Maybe you really don't like them, and you could certainly build this, and typically maybe if you were a centralized entity, they would stick their lawyers on you. I'm just using an example. I don't have a particular axe to grind against Chase, but I do think crypto is the future of banking. Token holders decide what happens, not centralized leaders. Again, the community controls and owns the project, not a couple insiders or people just not a relatively small amount of shareholders. DAOs offer massive orders of magnitude improvements over their traditional counterparts with respect to transparency, ability to attract global capital and labor, and starting costs. We covered that earlier. And finally, I think one important thing to keep in mind is I kind of like, and I was channeling my like poli-sci background when I was working on this presentation, but I kind of feel like DAOs are a new building block for civil society. And as a reminder, what we mean in the poli-sci space when we talk about civil society is sort of like things that are separate from the government, things that humans organize around that are not the government. A great example is, of course, organized religion has some serious problems of its own for sure, but like, think back to the Cold War. In Poland, the Solidarity movement, which was kind of built around strong Catholicism in Poland, turned out to be an incredibly strong vanguard against communism, against socialism in the USSR. That's an example of civil society. Another good example of civil society is right here. We're just hanging out, organizing and gathering on our own, separate from these institutions. I view DAOs as like a way to empower civil society, or maybe a new component of civil society. That again, the stronger a civil society is, I think the more pushback there can be against creeping authoritarianism. I just wanted to sum up with this quote. So I'm being lazy here because this is the quote I ended with in my last talk, but I love it so much because it speaks to what we're doing. This is from Alexander Solzhenitsyn, who is the author of the Gulag Archipelago, a Soviet dissident who courageously, just really spoke out against that oppressive regime. The simple step of a courageous individual is not to take part in the lie. One word of truth outweighs the world. So DAOs present a way that you can voluntarily opt out, voluntarily and in a non-violent fashion, opt out from the collective lie that we have to deal with. I'm not saying DAOs will give you the power to be like, well, am I going to pay my taxes or fuck everything? Of course, we have to live in this world, but it's a way to voluntarily opt out, remove yourself, and build separately from this this other reality built by our institutions. I had a whole section to address Bitcoin maxis. I don't think I need it, but anyway, that's my talk. That's my TED talk. Thank you for coming.
So could you talk maybe a little bit about the technical details or software support that differentiates DAO from just a regular wallet?
So when you say regular wallet, do you mean like a crypto wallet?
Mm-hmm.
That's a really good question. So I'd say the biggest difference, like at a very simple level, like a Treasury's wallet, I mentioned you can see ShapeShift finances. You can go to Etherscan, a blockchain explorer, and see exactly the state of our finances. That is essentially a type of wallet that holds all those. It's a little bit fancier than a normal wallet. It's called a multi-sig wallet. So it means that just one person can't control what happens. You need multiple people approving it. But basically, that is a wallet. The key difference with a DAO, and this is where smart contracts come in, because if it wasn't for if all you needed was a wallet, you really wouldn't need anything other than that. Maybe you could just build this stuff on Bitcoin, because Bitcoin is very good at transferring Bitcoin back and forth in a secure and decentralized way. But smart contracts provide the means by which you can create tokens for each DAO. So and it'll just Liberty on the Rocks DAO, LOTR DAO. You want to create a token for that. You can do that very easily and in a very cost-effective fashion. There's tools for this. We can literally sit down and probably do it in like 10 minutes. So that's an important element, and then also that governance aspect, the fact that you can use it, then use those tokens to vote over the proceedings or the direction of the DAO. This is facilitated by on-chain, or basically smart contracts that allow that voting to happen. So at the very basic level, that's kind of the components. Additionally, you could probably encode some business logic about how different things on chain might work with finances. And then one thing also worth noting is a lot of these projects are actually DAOs built around smart contracts themselves. So to use a good example is Uniswap, which is a decentralized exchange. There's billions in this DAO. It's the most popular exchange there is, and in fact more popular than many centralized exchanges. In this case, you have a DAO that's governing, and that community is built around a project that itself is smart contracts. Uniswap is just smart contracts on the Ethereum blockchain. So those are kind of some of the fundamental attributes of DAOs in terms of the on-chain tech. Yes?
Hold on.
Sorry to interrupt you. I've got two. So sorry. One question is: these people who invested in a copy of the Constitution, what happened to their money?
Great question. The money was all returned.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then the second question is: I think this might be something that I just don't understand about blockchain, but is this all about just investing in an idea that you believe in, or is there something like do you have to put money into this, or is it something where you just can be part of a group or something?
That's a really good question. There's a little nuance to this. I'll address that question first. In order to have influence over governance, typically you're going to need the token. In some cases, you can just get those tokens maybe for participating. For most DAOs that are larger, you do need to maybe purchase those tokens, and then you can kind of have a say in the vote. For newer DAOs, you wouldn't really need to spend that much money because maybe their token has a low price. Other times, maybe there really is not a financial aspect, and it's more like, okay, I've joined this community. This usually happens on Discord. You might join a community and you're involved and you've done some cool stuff, and somebody says, hey, have these tokens. The tokens can be of use in terms of governance and sort of clout in a community, even if they don't actually have any value, because they can be used to vote on things, and they also are a bit of they provide some social proof. So that's kind of one element. In terms of like what motivates anybody to join, it could also be just you're simply interested in like what the project is working on. At ShapeShift, we've had people show up in our Discord and they just want to hang out and kind of like contribute their thoughts, and even if they're not like financially invested in it, or they don't have maybe they're not interested in playing a super active role in governance, they just like what we're doing. I'm just speaking from my own perspective, but I mean, I think this story plays out across all the hundreds or thousands of DAOs that are out there in terms of people self-select. Like, man, I really love that. I'm an artist and I really love that what Pleaser DAO is doing. I love the idea of sort of like leveraging, our collective desire to do X, Y, Z. So that's because of that permissionless and voluntary aspect, not involuntary and voluntary. People find it easy to just self-select and like join different communities, and of course you could have like forums or subreddits around communities, but the ability to kind of have like that on-chain logic and have these have the governance aspect as well makes it really powerful. Does everything need a DAO? Certainly not. But as we've seen, there's a lot of people are finding a lot of uses for DAOs.
Do you see a standardization around the kind of DAO contracts that are being used? Surely not all DAOs write their own contracts.
For sure, yeah, that's a great question, JD. In terms of standardization, we're still very early on, but we are seeing kind of like more DAOs are using certain tooling. For example, there's something called Colony that ShapeShift uses to manage like paying contributors. Many other DAOs use that. We also use a governance function called Snapshot that these are contracts for voting for governance that a third party built that the DAO leverages. So the DAO hasn't actually built too many of its own contracts for those functions, and that's a huge difference. Even like 2 years ago, that tooling wasn't really available, and it's like you kind of had to roll your own. So I think the existence of many or more of these tools and smart contracts is one reason why we're seeing a proliferation of DAOs, because it's just easier to spin one up now.
All right. Being a serial entrepreneur means that I've lost a lot of money.
Hopefully made some along the way too.
Well, I made a little bit, but not as much as I've lost recently. But how does the online transfer over to a terrestrial business? I have a sports league that I would like to build up, right? And I would like my players to be able to receive their wages or their winnings or their earnings off of the governmental system. How do we do that with a DAO?
Okay, so that's an interesting question. Why, in this case, you'd have to maybe articulate specific reasons for why you'd want that community to exist as a DAO. I would argue, don't use DAOs as like tax avoidance structures. This would be highly risky. Like I earn money from the DAO and I still have to report taxes, and it's like you're not you're welcome to make any decisions you want with respect to taxes, but like, you know, the IRS is a panopticon. I hate it, but like, yeah, paying taxes sucks, but you're still earning income, and that aspect, it just, you know, it's death in taxes. It sucks. We need to fight the bigger system of like, why is the government so big? But you could leverage some of the aspects I talked about to make. Did you say this is a fantasy football thing or?
No, it's T-Link fling golf.
Fling golf. Okay, is it like frisbee golf?
No,
I don't know if.
Something like that.
Man, you learn something every day.
But, hey, dude, I
Hey.
show you
All right,
whatever.
fling golf.
Fantastic, bro.
So this is like currently you have your community. Is it kind of people across the country or?
Exactly, and around the world, right? And to be able to exchange freely across platforms around the world would be really nice. To be able to have borderless communication would be really nice. I know that the DAO isn't just a big database, but it does allow for some functions that I would think would benefit a sports league that has a tendency to spread out.
If that sports league entailed like treasuries, like people actually winning money, a DAO could be a wonderful choice, or at least like having a, yeah, I'd say a DAO would be good, like leveraging like the wallet technology. Say, okay, hey, this is our wallet. You know, maybe you could make it so like, you know, 3 or 5 of the people, you know, you and a couple other principals can control it, but you all have to like act at the same time to send funds, or you're like all, you know, sign off to send funds. Just that alone could be kind of cool, because it's like you don't have to trust some dude with a Venmo. Additionally, you don't have to like worry about borders in the sense of like, let's say you have some contributors in Colombia or something, and like, or some people who want to get involved financially, just send in some ETH, man, or send USDC, stablecoin, whatever. So DAOs, you know, they don't magically solve everything, and they're not for every use case, but we're still early on. I'll bet over time more and more cases like that, where you wouldn't necessarily think, oh, that has to be a DAO. Maybe it could be. So without knowing more about the fling golf thing you're doing, it's hard to say. But wow. Oh, you've had your hand up for a while. Or sorry, I was just the mic. Sorry.
So I have 2 questions. The first is, what programming language should I study to develop something like this for Monero? And the second is, one day the United States government the federal government is probably going to collapse. So what do you think about this system being used to create like a distributed autonomous republic?
Man, that is a really good question. To address your first one, so full disclosure, I'm not a developer, but in the smart contract space, especially in Ethereum, we use a language called Solidity that's heavily sort of based on JavaScript. So that's a good one to know. Also, Rust is one that a lot of people know. Did you say for building on Monero? So Monero actually is not a smart contract platform. It's really good at anonymity, just like Zcash. Very good for that, but it's not a. You couldn't really build a DAO as far as I know on Monero, but you know, leveraging that to do other things. I mean, like financial privacy is super important, but JavaScript would be a good starting point. Okay, so 100% yes on your second question. Can this serve as the structure for, like, let's say our institutions have failed? I think they're already kind of failing, and it blows people's minds because we're so used to this world we live in. But yeah, man, this shit can definitely collapse. But I'm an optimist. I like to think it's not going to be a Mad Max situation afterwards, and hopefully we can utilize this stuff. So when you think about it, like, DAOs could absolutely take the place of, you know, just let's use the example. We won't start big. Let's just use the example of like a regional municipal government, which is, those are always like fraught with like problems with transparency, and you know, Sally over here misappropriated $30K that was supposed to go to like, you know, kids' birthday parties or whatever. Like, but something like that would be perfect for replacing that structure, because there's that transparency, there's the ease of access, it's easy to focus around different things, and then at the same time we have things like Bitcoin and Ethereum, which can serve as like the financial underpinning for those systems. So it's scary to think about. I think there's certainly a chance that these institutions will fail, but at the same time, we're building this technology that is kind of our lifeboat. So yeah, absolutely.
So my question, I believe you already answered part of that. So because it's a smart contract, it means Ethereum. It's Ethereum-based technology. Am I correct?
Sorry, you said it's what?
Is it Ethereum-based technology?
It's Ethereum-based.
Is it correct?
Yes, yeah.
Okay, and I heard also that Ethereum switched from proof of work to proof of stake.
Correct.
So, and because of that, I think Ethereum became much more centralized. So it has several big stakeholders who could be actually very easily pushed by government to say, okay, just do not accept any more transactions related to this DAO.
Right.
So government can actually switch your DAO off. So it's the way how government can push you.
So you're talking about the government basically taking control over Ethereum itself.
Yes.
So I mean, hypothetically, is this possible? I would say certainly. It's also possible with Bitcoin as well, in terms of imagine miners. So actually, I've prepared some charts for this because I love this group, but there's always tends to be some, and I don't want to call it. I don't know if you're a maximalist or not, but there's people that are often skeptical of Ethereum. So let's take a look at this because this is, I think, a common sort of critique of Ethereum in the wake of the move to proof of stake. But I think it's a little bit overstressed and it's not quite accurate. So yes, let's this appendix. So here's the Bitcoin mining pool distribution as of today. So we have basically 3 pools that tend to produce most of the blocks. Foundry USA is a very huge mining pool. They produce, not the majority for sure, but they alone have like 33%. They, along with Antpool, could collude. Just those 2 mining operations could collude to execute a 51% attack on the network. Do I think this is likely? No. But could a government basically take over those operations or somehow force them to collude? Just 2 entities, for sure. That could absolutely happen. I think China did Bitcoin mining a favor by kicking everybody out because now China doesn't have as much influence over it. But I think my point is still valid here. And then you have FT Pool, who's also a large one. So you have certainly some high concentration in terms of just relatively few parties you could execute an attack on. And this is one thing. As much as we talk about decentralization, there's always risks, whether it's Bitcoin or Ethereum. And we should not get all caught up in everything's fine. We have to be on guard against centralization risks. So let's look at Ethereum staking distribution, and this is as of today. We have obviously some big players here: Coinbase and Kraken and Binance. Obviously 3 centralized exchanges. They have a lot of stake because it's so easy. If you're on Coinbase, yes, I'm going to give my ETH to Coinbase to stake, and that's great. But the problem is, you do wind up with Coinbase having more stake. Lido is a little bit of an interesting situation because it's not just they don't directly control all the stakers, but they sort of everybody's participating in that protocol. But we'll say for the sake of this argument that they are one single entity. And then you have the unknown, which is basically these are a lot of solo stakers, meaning people just staking their own thing or companies staking their own thing. This is not one giant entity. So in this case, I would argue that the Bitcoin mining pool distribution is actually more centralized and more prone to those type of risks than staking. Not to say that Ethereum that we shouldn't be concerned about the distribution or making Ethereum more decentralized. This is absolutely something that's important, and I don't think the community should lose sight of it. But I think those concerns are overstated. In other words, if you have a problem with this, you should probably be worried about Bitcoin as well. It could certainly happen, but there's some interesting. So this is kind of like this is the clusterfuck scenario that we always talk about. So let's say government wanted to shut down crypto. I think that the number one thing the government would do, they wouldn't necessarily try to take over like the network itself. I think what would likely happen is they would just say, we're going to make it illegal to buy Bitcoin or Ethereum or to sell it. That alone would go a huge way towards stopping crypto. In terms of doing this, so let's say they did, let's say they actually did take over the network. I think this is where you could fall back to hard forks. The same is true of Bitcoin. So in other words, let's say, like it would be very obvious if, like, let's say the Chinese government bought up enough Ethereum or Ether to basically have complete control over the network. You know, more than 51%, they can have influence over what happens. No longer is it decentralized. At that point, the community could say, okay, we know which tokens the Chinese government has acquired because they're attacking the network. We're going to fork the network, create a new one, and basically just like, you know, fork out these tokens. In other words, there would be a huge financial penalty for China to do that because, yes, would they fuck with the network and kind of control it for a little bit, perhaps, but at a massive cost. We're talking about billions of dollars. Of course, China has billions of dollars, but quickly, I think the network could fork itself. I imagine for Bitcoin, you know, a similar fork scenario might happen, and I'm glad you brought this up because I think a scenario where governments try to do this is certainly plausible, and we always need to be aware of it. Thank you for your question. Yes.
Hi, I have a similar question, but more basic from my poor knowledge about crypto. I have two questions actually. My first one is like, let's say I want to buy a token of your DAO, and I have dollars, and so how does it work? At first, does my bank allow me to exchange these dollars for your DAOs? And where do these dollars go? And who is managing these dollars? So is the DAO managing all these dollars on a bank account of some banks?
Great question. So let's kind of start with the flow of you as an individual user who wants to purchase, in this case, the token of ShapeShift is called Fox. So I can't speak for your own bank. Some banks are really crypto skeptical and they don't allow you to connect with centralized exchanges like Coinbase, which is the biggest exchange in the US. That historically was the case until a couple of years ago, but now things have gotten better. You know, Coinbase is a big publicly traded company now. They're considered more legit by the establishment. But basically, here's what you do. You create, we'll say you're a U.S. citizen, you create a Coinbase account, you connect your bank account. At that point, you can send your U.S. dollars into Coinbase. There's many tokens available for purchase on Coinbase, everything from Bitcoin to Ether to many smaller projects, of which ShapeShift is one. ShapeShift is listed on Coinbase. At that point, maybe you say, okay, I have $1,000. I'm going to buy $1,000 worth of Fox. And this is done in a very similar fashion to what you would do like on a brokerage, buying stock. At that point, you have two decisions, or you have two choices. You can either trust Coinbase to continue to hold that Fox for you, or you could send it to yourself in what we call a hardware wallet, and or some other wallet you control. I think the self-custody route is better, but it's not for everybody. But then let's take it all the way down to the last step where, okay, so what does that mean? Like, who then is controlling that money? Like, you sent money in. So by purchasing Fox, you've maybe marginally, even at a small level, is just $1,000. Maybe you've made some small impact on the price. That's most direct impact. That money doesn't necessarily then go to the DAO because that's not really how it works. If somebody were to come in and buy like $10 million worth of Fox token, then the price would certainly go up. And if the price were to go up, then that would actually improve the DAO's finances because the DAO holds a lot of its native token, Fox. Again, I could point you to the Blockchain Explorer link that has the DAO's finances. You can see precisely, we have 11 million whatever Fox tokens. So the benefit to ShapeShift or any DAO of people purchasing that token is the more, if the price of the token rises, then the value of the DAO's treasury goes up because it typically has a lot of that token. So that's, at a high level, that's how the economics of it kind of works out. Yes?
Does the DAO or do most DAOs have any legal entity?
So this is where you see all sorts of different experiments and approaches. Some have absolutely no legal entity. Some have like a legal wrapper in like the Cayman Islands. That's been a popular one. They all have trade-offs and different risks, and that's kind of one of the challenges I was speaking to. There's not really, even though there's some standardization around tooling, there is not a lot of like standardization around the legal and regulatory stuff. It's kind of a lot of experimentation. I mentioned Wyoming. They have some laws about DAOs. I would say anybody that's thinking about a DAO might want to get a sense of what exactly they want to do and kind of like how they wanted to approach that, because there's a lot of trade-offs.
So I guess on that note, if they don't have a legal entity, what is the primary value add of becoming a DAO as opposed to just a random organization that wants to do something that's unpopular and maybe uses, say, Monero and DAI and doesn't want that public exposure? Would they have any reason to be a DAO?
So you're talking about like a crypto project that wanted to leverage like crypto superpowers, like a Monero thing, but not necessarily be a let's see. I mean, you could do that, but you just wouldn't have that sort of governance aspect. You could just have like, hey, we're gonna have this project, and here's the Monero wallet, and we can see how much is in it. But you're gonna lose a certain amount of like complexity if you lose that business logic that's in the smart contracts, I would say, especially the voting stuff.
And my second question was about the governance, because obviously people vote, but who decides what's to be voted for? You said there is proposals that are proposed, but who can propose this proposal? Because maybe there will be people proposing thousands of stuff. So someone has to decide what are the strategic decisions to be made, and is that who decides that?
You don't want a scenario where people are spamming the whole thing, because then it doesn't work. So that's a really good question, and it's something that we had to think a lot about at ShapeShift. I say we, it was I'd actually like I was taking a break at the time when it was getting underway, but like the people who sort of built the rules of the game for the DAO at its inception had this in mind. And like what we do is we have a whole process where we have a forum where really anybody can come in and participate. If you're a dick, if you're spamming, well, of course censorship is okay in that case. I think it's like, don't be a dick, but like anybody can come with an idea, and if it's a proposal that the community thinks has merit in like an initial forum post, then it kind of becomes a more something that's kind of voted on. We call it ideation, but it's like a pre-vote where you're trying to really get a sense of like, okay, does this have enough support to even actually go up for an actual vote? And the community will talk about this in the forum and maybe in our Discord. Should the community seem interested in like, okay, this is something that we really that seems to have support, or that's something that should be actually voted on, at that point it actually does go up for a proper what we call on-chain vote. At that point it's actually, this is recorded and voted on the blockchain in a transparent and immutable way. That's the DAO's, that's ShapeShift's approach. But there's many other ways to go about that. I think, there's maybe a sliding scale. You don't want to be too heavy-handed. You don't want to open yourself up to spam. But that's, there are ways to deal with that sort of threat, I guess.
Last question. Do you think the maxis will ever embrace DAOs if DAOs are launched on Bitcoin?
I don't know how DAOs will get launched on Bitcoin, to be honest. Although this past week, NFTs were launched, or not launched, but like somebody figured out a way to kind of do NFT type functionality on Bitcoin, which is cool. But I think it would be likely that over time the maxis will eventually start to embrace this technology for the sheer reason that it's going to become such a ingrained and ever-present part of our day-to-day lives. Like, in other words, shunning this technology would be similar to like shunning like the internet, like email, fuck email, like like that doesn't happen. It's axiomatic. I think that's, and I love Bitcoin, not to put down Bitcoin, but Bitcoin is very limited in what it does, and meanwhile all this cool stuff is happening, in the smart contract and in Ethereum space.
That's our talk. Give it up for Ken.
Thank you.